Well, I'll call the meeting of the Board of Water Commissioners for the 21st of January of 2016 to order. Before we proceed, I'd like to note sadly that a former Water Commissioner, Arlie Scove, passed last month, so we'll note that sadly. And we'll proceed to item 2, the roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Keller, I'm sorry.
Present.
Commissioner Kilborn.
Present.
Commissioner Davis.
Present.
Commissioner Jordan.
Here.
Commissioner Burney.
Present.
Thank you.
Are there any changes to the agenda?
No, Chair Keller.
Okay, we now have item 4, which is public comment. I'm not sure we have any public here to comment, so we'll pass on that one for this time and move to the consent items, which are meeting minutes of the December 21st meeting, authorization of groundwater basin boundary modifications, and contract for construction of Gutierrez and Chapala sewer improvements. Have any comments regarding those?
Motion to approve.
I have one minor comment regarding the basin boundaries. The map does not show a well in storage unit 3, and we don't have a potable water well there, but we do have a production well, so it might be appropriate to put that well on there. Otherwise, have a motion to approve.
Mr. Chair, were those minutes the 14th or the 21st? They say different on the agenda than they do in the minutes.
They're from December 21st, from December 14th.
You're correct. On the minutes themselves, it says December 14th, and on our agenda today, it says the 21st, so I was reading off the agenda.
The day I wasn't here, so I'll abstain from the approval.
Okay.
So we're still awaiting a second.
Second.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
So carried. Thank you. Administrative items, item number 6. First one, contract for construction of the El Estero wastewater treatment plant secondary process improvement project. Ms. Arroyo.
Chair Keller, Commissioners, Joshua Hagmark here, Water Resources Manager. And as we get into today's presentation, one of the things that I think we can quickly get lost in is this is a very complex project, a very significant part of the facility. And so wanting to just step back and talk a little bit about the wastewater process and why this project is so significant. So we'll be going over the purpose and goals of this project highlights, obviously, cost summary and the current timeline for completing this project. But just to back up, as sophisticated as we are in this day and age, we still rely on basically bacteria, a very natural process to clean up our wastewater. And what we've done is create in this wastewater treatment plant the ideal situation for this bacteria to basically break down our waste stream. And so what we're doing ultimately with this project is trying to introduce a more diverse population of bacteria so that we can get a larger and more complete treatment of our wastewater stream. And so that, in a nutshell, is what this whole project, roughly $30 million project, is intended to do, is to try and increase the diversity of bacteria that we have. And it's critical, as Ms. Arroyo will go into, it's critical to the future plans for what we have with the wastewater treatment process. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Arroyo to kind of walk you through the goals of the project.
Thank you. The goals of this project can largely be grouped into 4. The first is replacing our aging infrastructure. Our plant was built in about 1978. It was built in response to the 1970s Clean Water Act requirements. Much of that infrastructure that we have built in the 1970s is still here today, and so we need to go through and we need to replace that equipment and some of that infrastructure. We also need to go through and take a look at the operational flexibility. This project is going to increase that flexibility. It's going to give the operators better control over the process. It's going to allow them to operate the treatment plant much better when we're finished. We're also going to be able to increase our energy efficiency. A lot of our equipment, again, is back from the 70s. It's very inefficient. It doesn't adequately provide supply and demand for us, and so that will definitely be something that this project will accomplish. In addition, we'll also be improving flow distribution. As you'll see from some of the slides, all of our basins are offset, and we tend to have some short circuiting going on that is hampering some of our treatment abilities. Before I continue, I do want to just make this one point. We currently treat to standards. We're not having any of problems with violating our permits. We do make our permit, and that's not what this project is about. It's about improving our water quality and replacing our aging equipment and just making our whole process much better. So before we go into the nuts and bolts of the project, I want to take a moment and just bring you into the treatment plant for a little bit of treatment and process overview. I think it will help as we go through, bring an understanding as to what we're doing. This is a snapshot of basically our treatment process. If you take a look right up here on the upper left hand of your screen, right here is where we've got the water coming in from the collection system. If we zoom in, we've got our head workstation right here. That's going to screen out all of our larger objects that we don't want going downstream to damage equipment. It screens out things like paper towels, twigs, diapers, all that sort of things that can really get clogged up in our pumps. The next thing that happens with the water is it goes into our influent pump station where it gets pumped up to the aerated grit chamber. Once we get inside of the grit chamber, we're going to be slowing that wastewater down. We're going to be letting our inorganics settle down to the bottom, as you see from the picture right here, and our water's going to continue on. We're then going to move over towards more of this top center of this picture. This is really where the nuts and bolts of the project are going to happen. We're going to go into our primary clarifiers next. In our primary clarifiers, we're going to continue to slow that water down. We're going to have those settable solids start to settle out, and our water is going to continue down to our aeration basins. The aeration basins is where the biological process takes place. It's where the treatment takes place with the bacteria that Joshua was talking about. This is a critical aspect of our project. We've got our bacteria in here. We aerate it because they need air, and then they break down the organics in our wastewater and help treat it biologically. Once it leaves the aeration basin, it goes into the secondary clarifiers. Your bacteria or your sludge, it's going to kind of compact and settle down to the bottom, as you see with this brown kind of stripe right here. Your clear water is going to be decanted off the top, and it's going to go down and be disinfected. What's going to happen with your bacteria, it's hard to see the mouse right here, but here's your sludge is going to end up going into a wet well, and then it's going to recirculate and kind of go through that whole loop again, although a portion of it will be wasted because we need to control our population. So here are some of our project highlights. You can group them basically into these four categories. We have the aeration system improvements, the secondary clarifier improvements. We have a new chemical storage area, and we're going to be upgrading our sludge withdrawal system. And as we go through the presentation, I'll be bringing this pictorial up more just to kind of keep you oriented as to where all of these improvements are taking place. So the aeration system improvements, most of the project is really centered around these. As I stated before, it's the biological process. We're looking for that greater diversity of the bacteria and that higher quality effluent when we're done. Your aeration basins are this big red square right here. We have 6 of them. And then underneath this big white area, those are your primary clarifiers. Those are the covers on them. Underneath, we've got a whole gallery, and that's where your blowers are. Your blowers, they're really that critical component of the aeration basins. They supply the air that's needed when your bacteria is breaking down those organics. In the absence of airs, if our blowers were all to completely go down, within about 15 minutes, we're going to start to see that the bacteria, they're going to start to degrade. And within a very short period of time, they will start to die off. So Really important that we replace our blowers. This top blower right here, that's our Turbolex. It was put in about 2008. We're going to be retaining that. This bottom picture is one of our Roots blowers. That's original to the plant in the 1970s. We have 2 of them. We'll be replacing both of those. In replacing these, not only is it going to be replacing our aging infrastructure, which is so important, we're actually having problems maintaining these at this point because parts are becoming obsolete. We're going to be giving the operators greater operational flexibility. They're going to be state-of-the-art blowers. They're going to have controls where the operators are really going to be able to dial in that air supply to meet the demands of the aeration basins. We're also going to be improving energy efficiency. New blowers means better efficiency, and it's going to decrease costs for us on electrical costs. I want to take a moment as we're talking about blowers to talk a little bit about construction. When we get into the construction, sequencing of this is going to be very critical. Again, we start seeing the biomass start to degrade after 15 minutes, and we've got some issues with how our blowers are actually connected electrically. And so it's going to be just one of the many hurdles we're going to have to face as we go into construction of keeping the air going while we're untangling the electrical that is not quite desirable for doing a project of this magnitude. We're also going to be reconfiguring our aeration basins. This is what one of them looks like when they're full. And then this is with the water removed. Here you'll see some of the components. We've got the baffle walls. These are fiber reinforced plastic right here. We're going to be upgrading and we're going to be going with concrete walls. You might be able to see the diffusers. That's where the air comes up and bubbles up and supplies that air for the bacteria. We've got the piping all along the sides and the inlet gates. Basically, we're going to be replacing all of this infrastructure and upgrading it with new. One of the things we'll be doing when we reconfigure the aeration basins is reconfigure how we treat this water. We're going to be breaking it up into various zones where we're going to have different bacteria treating and doing different things with our wastewater. We're going to be breaking down that organic matter. One of the things you may see in the council agenda report is we're talking about going to nitrifying system. You will be converting the ammonia, the nitrogen in ammonia to basically to nitrogen gas, and so we'll be having far less ammonia in our effluent when we're done with this project. It's going to be the stepping stone for reuse if we ever choose to go there. When we go through construction and we go through the aeration basins, we're going to start with just 1 or 2 at a time, and we'll be upgrading them as we go along. So the sequencing for that actual portion shouldn't be as challenging as some of the other portions, but it still is going to be very challenging to construct while we have this facility running and treating wastewater 24/7. We've got a lot of improvements going on at the secondary clarifiers. I spoke at the beginning a little bit about the flow distribution, and right here you've got your primary clarifiers. We have 5 basins. Then you have your 6 aeration basins going into 7 clarifiers. And then you can see they're all offset, and what we're finding is that we're having short-circuiting of our flow, which means some of our flow, we're going to get more flow through one of our clarifiers than the other, and it's going to be not desirable from a treatment standpoint. So one of the things we'll be doing is better flow distribution. We'll be putting a centralized flume right here that's going to bring all of the wastewater out of the aeration basins to one centralized location to get distributed evenly into the secondary clarifiers. And that's going to have some great benefits to flow equalization. In addition, in the clarifiers, we're going to be replacing some of our aging equipment, our drives, and things like that. We'll also be upgrading our sludge withdrawal system. Most of the sludge withdrawal system is seen in the red boxed areas. All of this is underneath and the aeration basins and down in the gallery. Here you see a shot of the gallery. These are some of the sludge withdrawal pipes. And what's kind of interesting here is the sludge comes out and hydrostatically gets pushed back up to the aeration basins and then goes over by gravity to the wet well. So it's kind of a cool phenomenon. We'll be increasing the size of those suction pipes. We'll be putting meters on them so we have better flow measurement. Here are some of the pumps that we'll be replacing. When these 3 pumps that are off here to the right, those are to basically recycle our bacteria back to the front. You might hear the term return activated sludge a lot, or RAS. Those are those pumps. We're going to be upgrading those to 4 of them. When we're in construction, because we have to upgrade both our pipes, our pipe sizes, our pumps, one of the things the contractor is going to have to do is come in and put in a temporary pumping system while all of these improvements are made. In addition, we'll be putting a new line to waste our bacteria or our sludge. This line is going to go down through the plant, as you see with that red line. Construction of it is going to be challenging because we have a number of underground utilities that cross our plant, and just very challenging to do. In addition, I'm sure you've heard a little bit about some of the contaminated soils issues we've had with the desalination plant. We've planned for that accordingly in our bid by putting a contingency in, although we're very hopeful that we're only going down 3 to 4 feet, that we're not going to hit contaminated soils, but that's something that we've actually taken into consideration in our bids. We'll be having a new chemical storage area. One of the things we're moving to, and I spoke to the commission maybe a year and a half ago about chemically enhanced primary treatment. We'll be putting new chemicals into our primary treatment that will help us with reducing the overall loading to the secondaries, which means you'll be able to increase or decrease some of your air demand. We'll be using a couple different chemicals. Here's the site. We'll have ferric, which is, we already use ferrous at the beginning of our plant for odor control. It's required for part of our APCD permit. We're just going to be putting it at a different spot now. We're going to be putting it at the front of our primaries. It's going to serve as a coagulant, so it's going to help those organics start to clump together. Then we'll be putting a polymer in there. That polymer is going to act as a flocculant, so it's going to help those clumps start to settle down. In addition, we'll be putting ammonium sulfate in, and that's going to help us with our disinfection process. I put the plan view up here so you can see this is going to be a bulk storage area. So the drivers, they'll be able to come up through this driveway, park their trucks right here, and pump their chemical into these bulk tanks. And this is a 3D model of what that site will look like. Probably one of the most critical things is the startup of, as we start moving to this new process of diversifying our bacteria, moving towards a nitrification process, is that actual startup of it. We anticipate that we'll be putting in all of the improvements first, and then we'll be looking at starting up and changing this process. We are going to be looking at, and I zoomed in on 2 aeration basins, so hopefully you can visualize what we'll be doing. The contractor will be putting in temporary piping and pumping of these 2 basins. They'll start empty. We'll put in some of our bacteria and start filling it up. And what we'll be doing is we'll be growing that bacteria, increasing that concentration. And once it hits that target, pumping and recirculating through those basins, then we'll take one more basin on. And it's basically recirculating those bacteria through. It's not introducing new wastewater to it. That's happening in the other remaining 3 and 4 basins. This is really just going to be growing that bacteria. Once we get to that desired concentration, we're going to add one more basin online, one more basin online, and then we'll flip the switch, so to speak, and we'll be in our new mode of operation. We expect that it'll take somewhere between 14 to 21 days before the process is stabilized. This is a very critical point in the treatment process and in this construction process, we've asked Brown and Caldwell, our designers, to have their process people down when we're starting up this new process. And it is going to be critical. Chris Toth used to refer to this project as open heart surgery for the plant. It is truly open heart surgery for the plant. So a cost summary here. We have a $20 million SRF installment sales agreement. The assessment phase was about a little over $300,000. The planning phase was about $725,000. Final design was about $1.6 million. Our construction bids came in. Our low bidder was at $21.7 with change order. We're just shy of $24 million. And then construction management, we're just shy of $5 million. And that's high compared to what you would normally see on some of our projects. However, construction management isn't just construction management on this project. It is operational support as well. We have Brown and Caldwell coming down to help us start it up. We have them helping us with updating our operation and maintenance manuals, upgrading our CMMS or our computerized maintenance management system with all of the new equipment. We've got some design going on. One of the things that we found out during final design very, very late was the water from the desal project. It's got a very low alkalinity compared to what we're seeing. And we're going to need to design an alkalinity facility while this project's in construction, and we're going to have them constructed as well. So there's also some design in that nearly $5 million number. So one of the things you may kind of be wondering is how we got from $20 million to $31 million as a total project cost. Between the preliminary design, when we were at about $16 million construction cost, we have added the chemical storage area, which wasn't considered initially. That's a couple $1 million. We've had some additional equipment, electrical work that we've had to do and put into the project. The alkalinity facility, we've put about $500,000 as a placeholder in the bids for that facility. We've added about $500,000 of contaminated soils contingency that we really hope we don't have to use, but it's there if we need it. And then obviously the construction management and operational support higher than the original 10% that we normally would see on those contracts. So that's how we got from 20 to 31. If we take a look at the project timeline, we're hoping to go to council in February for award of a construction contract. Some of the process to get there is challenging because of the SRF loan. We have to do an amendment to our loan from the $20 million to the 31, which is in process. Once we get that amendment, we can go to city council. We can award the construction contract. It could be, we'll have to do an ordinance to allow the Public Works Director to enter into the amendment. So there's a little bit of a timing issue. We may be March. And then we're hopeful we can start construction as soon as April. It may be more like May. And it's about a 2-year project, so you'll look to see a completion in summer of 2018. And that concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer some questions.
Thank you. Very nice presentation. Do we have any questions from the commissioners?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple. So, Josh, you may be more appropriate. So, as these loans stack up, the $31 million here, the $50 million there, is there just a general amount for a single-family residence that you could say for a $31 million loan or a $50 million desal loan that it's adding to a monthly service? Amortized, it's a 20-year amortization?
That's correct, Commissioner Jordan. We have been working on this and planning for this for now a year and a half, 2 years. And so we've been looking out, and we did recognize that we're going to have about $60 million in improvements at the wastewater treatment plant. So our 10-year rate rate plan has included this, which is about a 5% increase every year for the next 10 years to kind of address this. That 5% increase ends up being about a little over $1.30 a year.
5% of the $30 base charge, or
Right now the base charge, if you're using over 10 HCF, it's approaching $45 a month is what the wastewater charges are. I imagine we'll be around in the 50s once we've completed the $60 million worth of projects.
So my point is, it's just dollars.
Dollars.
Yeah, well,
yes.
I mean, in the scheme of things, I guess is the point I want to make, is it's people hear the big number and think, oh my God, but when you get to amortize it at a low interest rate and spread it out over all the ratepayers, it's, in the scheme of things, in my view anyhow, it's just a couple bucks. Yeah, for great improvements. And then my other question was on the last line on your reference to the danger of permit violations and your description of open heart surgery. And I'm just wondering, so as you go through that process, that 14 to 21 day process, and that seems to be like the key time when it would happen, right? When you're opening new basins, trying to get them up to bacteria levels, maybe then introducing the process. What actually happens if you violate the permit? Do you get any relaxation for what's going on the ground, or are there other steps taken, or what happens if you just run into a situation in the middle of that time where you just can't hit the numbers at all, period?
We've been researching that very issue. We are looking into working with the regional board there's a 90, as I understand it, there's a 90-day construction as you're changing over process period where you may have some forgiveness, if you will. So we are looking into reaching out to the board and discussing that with them and seeing if we would qualify for that. And certainly that would be the time period that we would want to have that 90 days kick in.
Okay, super. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions? Ms. Burney?
Thank you very much for the presentation. Can you touch on a little bit more the alkalinity issues with the desal plant and how that is all intertwined?
Sure. So our alkalinity coming in is when you go to the system that we're going to, a nitrifying system, the nitrifiers are going to be eating up alkalinity in the part of the process. And so we were right on that limit before desal came into play as to whether or not we would need it. We felt like we might need a little seasonally. When we took a look at the numbers from the desalination project and the feed water that we're going to be expecting to get from there, the alkalinity is much lower. So when it's combined with all of our other sources of water, we're expecting it to be much lower when it comes into the plant. So we'll need to add additional alkalinity to bring it up so that when we send it through this nitrification process, we'll still have some alkalinity at the end. The bacteria is not really going to like it if it doesn't have the alkalinity. We need to, sorry to say it, but we need to keep the bugs happy, and so we need alkalinity.
Thank you. I've got one more.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Kind of on the same lines, you mentioned that the nitrifying system is the stepping stone for reuse. So just a little bit more on that, if you don't mind as well.
So as part of these improvements, when we were scoping and doing the planning for this project, we were obviously looking out into the future. And as Ms. Royal already mentioned, we're meeting permit right now. It's not a question of that we're not meeting permit. We're just looking forward to, okay, we have an aging infrastructure. We need to make improvements. But what else can we do with this facility? And obviously, we're in the midst of a potable reuse study now, basically, and taking our wastewater, doing some advanced treatment to it, and looking to reuse it as a drinking supply. And so with that, obviously, this is a big step here, is to stabilize this water source and to improve it. And so that's kind of one of the, I think, big benefits of this project. It kind of keeps us in line and keeps the options open should we down the road decide to move in the direction of potable reuse. these improvements here will greatly support the water quality that will be necessary to make that leap.
Any other questions? Mike,
Yeah,
Commissioner Kilborn?
excuse me. Yeah, my question is related to the recycled water facility. How do these improvements, do they benefit that at all? Are we going to get better production, or will it operate more efficiently, or how's that all tie in?
Commissioner Kilborn, yes, exactly. When we were working on the tertiary project, ideally we would have liked to have completed this project first, but just the general timing and nature of this, it didn't work out. But we had, when we were designing the recycled water facility, had this project in mind, and this will greatly improve the feed water coming into our recycled water facility, should reduce the amount of backwashing and filter maintenance that needs to be done. And so, we're eager to get this project underway and to get it completed. We think it will reduce our operating costs for the recycled water system.
Others? I have first one brief comment regarding the alkalinity for people who aren't up to speed on these terms. Our freshwater supplies have dominant dissolved salts of calcium carbonate, which is high alkalinity, and obviously the ocean water has high sodium chloride, which is low alkalinity. So that's the difference between those basic water supplies is what's driving that. One small detail regarding the blowers, and I appreciate all the comments about how difficult it will be to keep things running while this is going on. But would it be possible to rewire them, or is it part of the project so that in the future you can turn the blowers off separately without having to turn everything off at once?
Absolutely. They are currently all wired to one bus bar, which means we have to take them all down in order to unwire them and literally remove one. So we will be making those corrections. So in the future, if we wanted to take one blower out and replace it and put a new one in, we aren't going to have the same problem again.
Thank you. Do you have another comment?
Yeah,
Mr.
Chair
Hagmark?
Keller, Commissioners. One thing I did want to recognize in this process is the people involved in this, the operators that staff this plant. This has been a big project, but as you know, there's been a lot of improvements down there. The headworks, recycled water facility, now the aeration basin. We have solids handling coming down the pike. The staff. I'm just really proud of the staff, in particular the time that goes into this. I mean, this is a lot of work. Imagine these staff have been hired to operate this plant under normal conditions, and now you're doing open heart surgery. They're still having to operate it, still having to provide services to the contractor, and then do their day job. And so it's something that I think basically goes unnoticed, but they are heroes. In my mind, they're heroes. And in particular, this facility really is the biggest protector of the environment. It really is. It is. This facility is what enables the city to exist. It protects public health, and it protects the environment that we live in. And so investments in the infrastructure and the people who keep this thing operating is quite amazing. And I just wanted to make that comment because without this facility, we'd be a much different place to live here.
Thank you. What we're being asked for is a recommendation on this, and the recommendation is actually 6 items, A through F, which amount to the information that was included by Ms. Arroyo in the cost summary. So without going back through all of those 6 individual items, that's what we're interested in.
Mr. Chair, I would move for approval of the recommendations recommended by staff. I also want to compliment the staff on the presentation, as well as Joshua's comments relative to the staff down at the plant. Very well spoken. So a motion to approve the recommendations as stated by staff.
I'll second.
So I have a motion and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Carried unanimously. Thank you. We now move along to item 6B, which is again listed as Ms. Arroyo, coastal infiltration and inflow sewer trunk main rehabilitation.
Thank you. It's my great pleasure to bring this project to you and to provide you an update on what's happening with it. This project actually started about 2 years ago. We put it into design. We bid it this fall, and we will be constructing shortly this spring. It should be complete. So taking you through about the purpose of this project, back in about 2012, we did a condition assessment of all of our large diameter sewer mains, one of which is the 33-inch clay main that is out on Cabrillo, runs in the beach, and I'll show you a picture of exactly where it is on the next slide. And we found a number of infiltration spots. This is you can actually see the infiltration coming in. That's seawater coming into our pipes. And while the pipes are structurally sound, we didn't find any real big deficiencies in them. We have a lot of active infiltration coming in on those pipes. So we've been working hard to come up with a plan on how we're going to rehabilitate these pipes. It's a very challenging area to work in. We've got about 8 or 9 segments right there along the beach. This red line will help kind of gear you towards where we're looking at. We're going to be rehabilitating about 2,400 lineal feet of 33-inch clay pipe. We're going to be rehabilitating 8 manholes, and then we're going to be chemically grouting, it's hard to see right up here, 1 manhole, which has got tons of infiltration just pouring into it. Part of the challenges with this project were permitting. That pipe lies partially in the local jurisdiction and partially within the California Coastal Commission jurisdiction. So initially we had some challenges as to how do we move forward with this project permitting wise, and we went to Planning Commission and their approval to basically defer to the California Coastal Commission to get a waiver, and that seemed to streamline the process, only having to work with 1 jurisdiction rather than 2 as we go in and out of the jurisdictions. Technology, what's the best way to accomplish this? We looked at all sorts of different technologies. Do we just chemically grout those joints? We felt like if we did something like that, we would have infiltration pop up somewhere else down the road and we wouldn't really be solving the problem. We looked at the different types of rehabilitation, and we finally landed on the cured in place liner, which is similar to what we do on our 6 and 8 inch lines all throughout the city. Bypassing and traffic control were very challenging for this project. Cabrillo Boulevard is not somewhere that I really like to have bypass lines running down, pumps, traffic control. Cost was definitely a concern, and as well as we've got that ongoing Cabrillo Bridge project. It's causing a lot of problems with sequencing. So I talked a little bit about we're going to do the cured in place lining. We left it open. When you do the cured in place lining, you can do one of a couple different ways of curing the liner. Traditionally, as you see in our 6 and 8 inch lines, we do thermal cure, so they're either going to use water or steam to, they'll put the liner in, they'll cure the resin, and it'll become a very hard, structurally sound pipe within the pipe, so to speak. This project's actually going to be using UV cured. So rather than the thermal, which we're used to, we're going to be doing curing by UV lights, and that's your UV train that you see on the left side, and there it is on the inside of a pipe on the right side. One of the benefits to having UV cured is that it came out to be half the price, and the reason it came out to be half the price is because their curing time is much faster. They're going to be curing the pipe in about 8 feet per minute, knocking down that overall construction of the segments down to about an 8 to a 10-hour day by the time they set up their bypass. They clean the pipe, they TV the pipe, they put the liner in, and they cure it, and they take it off bypass. We were looking at a considerable about more time if we were to use the traditional steam or water cured. Another benefit is that styrene smell, that stinkiness that you might have seen or might have smelt if you went by any of the rehabs. We tend to get some complaints on that. UV cured doesn't release that styrene because it's got a different curing process. We're also directly upstream of the plant, rehabbing very large mains, and styrene can really ruin your day on a secondary treatment if you get a good slug of it coming in. So this they were able to come in at a lower bid because they don't have to deal with the styrene, where the other companies that were bidding on it, the traditional water cured, they had to put in a non-styrene resin, and it at a premium cost. We also were looking at localized chemical grouting on some of the pipes because we've got that infiltration coming in. When you're doing the thermal cure, that causes a heat sink. So we had to put that into our bid items. With UV cured, we are not going to have to utilize those bid items because all you have to do is inflate your liner to a pressure that's greater than your water pressure coming in, and then you can go through and you can cure it. So we're going to be looking at about $100,000 savings by not having to chemically grout the actual pipe segments themselves. So here again is our long segment. The contractor's plan is basically to bypass and do one segment a day. So they'll be bypassing. There is going to be a bypass line along Cabrillo. It's going to be kind of tucked in out of traffic, so we're not going to be experiencing a whole lot of traffic control. And we're going to be looking, here's your Cabrillo Bridge right here. We're going to be looking to get most of this work done right up front before they do the swap. They're on the northern side right now constructing. They're going to move to the southerly side. We lose our ability to bypass basically April 1st when they move over to the southerly side. So we're going to be in construction next month, March, and then hopefully we will be completely done. We have put a lot of conditions regarding weather into the contract so that if the contractor has rain within the foreseeable future, in the forecast, they're not allowed to construct because we don't want them constructing when we have inflated flows. If we didn't do this project now, we'd be waiting until Cabrillo Bridge is completed before we'd be able to get into our next window and do the construction. So our construction costs and timeline, we're looking at about a $860,000 construction cost. That's where the low bid came in. We'll be giving them their notice to proceed in February, right around the 1st of February. You'll see them mobilizing down there on the beach, and they should be out or substantially complete in April. They may be doing a little bit of the manhole lining work, but that won't be as difficult as the actual sewer main lining work. Not sure that I really mentioned this at the beginning, but the whole purpose for this project is to reduce the total dissolved solids that's coming into the plant. When we're getting our seawater infiltration coming in, it's raising our TDS, or our total dissolved solids. So this is going to help bring that number down, which is very important for recycled water. And so I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Arroyo. Have any questions? Commissioner Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if you're having infiltration, aren't you having exfiltration too?
You know, our pipes are down, surrounded by seawater. We've got that hydrostatic pressure pushing that water in. I suppose under certain conditions, it may be possible that you might have your internal pressure in your pipe's going to have to overcome that hydrostatic pressure for that to happen. So we're thinking it's highly unlikely or doesn't really happen a whole lot if it does.
And then I'm squinting at that, but the line that's on the left part where it says the project vicinity, that's all in the sand actually where the piping is?
Correct. It is in the sand. We come out of the sand a little bit here. We cross Mission Creek right in here, and then there's Skaters Park right there. And then up, it continues on up here across Cabrillo Boulevard and into the plant.
And then you said how many feet a day?
They're going to do about one segment a day. The segments range from about 300 to 500 feet. It's going to be 2,400 lineal feet total.
And does that little picture of that UV thing, is it actually does it spray it on and then cure it, or is it?
No. So your liner's going to come in a big truck.
Okay.
And it's going to be, this is actually a fiberglass liner with resin on it. They're going to take that liner, they're going to drag it through a manhole and drag it down the pipe. They're going to pop it out with air, so to speak, and make it fit the pipe, and then they're going to drive that train down, and that train of lights, of UV lights, is what's going to cure your liner.
Okay, very cool. Okay, thanks.
Other questions or comments?
I had a question just regarding the CIPP and using the steam cured versus the UV light. How do they make sure they maintain adhesion to the outer or the wall of the pipe when they're running the UV train through? Because when you inject the steam, you pressurize the pipe, sticks to the wall. How do they maintain that using the UV?
They use air. Instead of the steam, they've got air that pushes it out.
So it'll actually be pressurized as the UV light goes through?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay.
And I can confirm that for you.
Others? I have just a comment that I'm very glad to see this being done. It's been a matter of frustration for quite a while that we're getting the seawater infiltration there. And ironically, one of the things that's been considered in our study of desal intakes is an infiltration gallery in the beach. And in fact, we have one, albeit rather inefficient. So I'm glad to see that we're getting rid of that. Thank you for the presentation. This was just a presentation. No action is required. So that finishes up item 6B. Item 6C, request to negotiate a recycled water sales agreement with La Cumbre Mutual Water Company. Mr. Hagmark.
Chair Keller, Commissioners, before Lisa leaves today, I want to recognize that she's been selected as the wastewater manager to replace Chris Toth. And so really appreciate it. We did have there was over 30 candidates who applied for the job, and Lisa was by far the most qualified to take over, and we're hoping she'll start Saturday. That's when our pay period starts, and we'll get her into that position. But anyway.
Congratulations, Ms. Roy.
Congratulations.
So this item does not have, well, actually I do have a PowerPoint somewhere. I wanted to put together a slide just to kind of show in general where we're talking about here. But this has been a discussion that's been ongoing with La Cumbre Country Club, which is an interest in connecting to the city's recycled water system. And just kind of stepping back, the recycled water system outside of desal is one of our most expensive sources of water. And it makes sense, financial sense, to do it when it offsets the need for potable water. And so as it relates to our own customers, that's kind of the basis for why we have recycled water. And then we turn around, and despite it being some of our most expensive, we sell it at 80% of our Tier 1 potable water rate to make it attractive for people to want to use it. Along with that, there's obviously challenges and restrictions in when you use it and what you use it for. And so we have a demand right now of about 1,100 acre feet. And so we have about 300 acre feet of a year of additional capacity. And La Cumbre Country Club approached us a few years ago, and during that time we were actually having to blend, and it didn't really make sense because we'd be exporting potable water. But now that we do have our new recycled water facility up and running, and we're not currently blending or have any plans to blend, we wanted to see how far we could get with some negotiations and a possible arrangement to better utilize our facility for the time being. In particular, we recognize that this agreement needs to have a sunset date. There may be a use for it in the city, a greater use of the city, and that should be our primary concern. But I think for the next 10 years, we don't anticipate needing that 150 acre feet that La Cumbre is looking for. And so this request really is because the La Cumbre is outside of our service area, wanting to get permission from the Water Commission and Council to at least start those negotiations and see what we can come up with. Maybe there's something we can find that will work. There is some infrastructure improvements, and that's kind of what I wanted to. I apologize, this graphic's kind of small, but what we're talking out here is near Hidden Valley Park. The city's recycled water system runs out here already. We'd be talking about basically it's a little over 1,000 linear feet of pipe that would need to be constructed. Part of this arrangement would be that La Cumbre Mutual or La Cumbre Country Club would be the ones extending that pipeline. And the way that their system is set up is lends to working with us because they can take recycled water at any time of the day. They have a very large reservoir on site, and so can take it and then utilize it when they need it. If they wanted it all at night, I don't think we could provide it to them just because of our own demands in our system without doing some major system improvements. But based on their on-site infrastructure, I think we've done a sufficient modeling now to feel comfortable that we could provide them. And what we'd probably do is provide them just a constant flow 24/7. They would take that, they'd put it into their reservoir and then use it whenever they needed it. But so anyway, at this point, we feel it's something worth exploring. The Cumbre Country Club is very concerned if the drought does continue, there could be a lawn watering moratorium, and being one of the only golf courses that doesn't have access to recycled water, they would be unfairly punished in the sense that they would have to let all their lawns go. So we are looking for input and comments from the Water Commission on this item.
Have any comments?
I'll go.
Ms. Burney.
Thank you very much. I guess my concern goes back to what we've talked about for the last couple years, which is, cost to water turf. And while I know that there's a lot of community members who use the golf course, my main concern would be providing recycled water at our existing recycled water rates and not the actual cost. So that would mean our residents are bearing the brunt of people being able to golf. So if we were to proceed with this negotiation, which I have full confidence in staff, I would just want to ensure that they were actually paying the true cost of that water.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I see in the staff report, and I just wanted to clarify the same thing. It says that you're going to negotiate on the basis of full cost recovery. And I'm assuming that's exactly what Ms. Burney is talking about also. So
That's correct. I mean, we've had some initial discussions with them, and I've been very clear that there's no way we're subsidizing this water to them, and I think there's a general understanding that they'd be paying the full cost of the recycled water, and I think that's, at times it's going to be more expensive than their potable water, and I think they're seeing this though, and the need to diversify their supplies as kind of this would be their next cheapest option to explore. We will be working an agreement out with La Cumbre Mutual. I'm not looking to add any customers at this point, so this would be a wholesale kind of agreement where we'd be selling water to La Cumbre Mutual. They would remain La Cumbre Mutual's customer. For La Cumbre Mutual, this is going to be a stretch for them too, because right now I believe the golf course is about 20% of their annual revenue. Like it's a pretty big part of their water sales, and so this is going to have an impact on that. But I think in the long term, this has some significant benefits on the South Coast to take those pressures off of our potable water. One of the things that we'll be talking about is also some exchange of potable water. Well, we're looking for some element of that. One of the easiest ways that we see to accomplish that would be the Foothill Basin. Right now, La Cumbre Mutual has rights to 300 acre-feet a year from Foothill Basin. And so as part of this agreement, maybe that withdrawal of 300 acre-feet is reduced, thereby, in essence, freeing up some water that we could extract for our own users. Again, just we'll see where this goes, but that could be one possible outcome that I don't see it being a one for one, but maybe some unbalanced exchange.
Thank you. Any further questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you're talking about La Cumbre Golf Course, but it's really a water transfer to another district, right?
Yeah, and it's even more complicated than that.
Okay, so my real question is in the complication of this, are you actually prohibited from making revenue in excess of the actual cost of service?
I don't believe so. I think we have to come up with something that's reasonable.
Okay. So I guess my 2 cents would be on that is that I would encourage you even to say cost of service as a floor, and that there should definitely be an advantage to the city and the city ratepayer in this relationship. This is a private golf course. Comes at a time when we're struggling to maintain the resources at our public golf course, which is if you want to call it a lower income golfing recreational opportunity for our residents. And my 2 cents is we should go into this with the intent of benefiting our ratepayers and our city resources, not just making costs.
Commissioner Jordan, just part of this, should we reach agreement on a cost recovery? One of the benefits of using more recycled water is the unit cost price goes down, and so in that sense, that would be a benefit. As I'd mentioned, we are already kind of subsidizing our recycled water to make it more attractive for folks to use. And what has been helpful is the Capistrano case, which came out and kind of challenged some of it, actually supported the subsidy to recycled water. It actually backed up that was an appropriate cost recovery to push that on because it does free up potable water supplies. So of all the goofy stuff that the Capistrano case introduced, it did ultimately support recycled water and the fact that we are currently selling it for less than what it costs for us to make it. So anyway, there's a lot to it, but increasing the sale would be increasing the amount of volume that we sell will ultimately reduce our unit cost, which would be really helpful to our customers and our revenue.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I would note that in terms of potential for trading off water use in the Foothill Basin, the La Cumbre Mutual well is in the geographically lowest and stratigraphically thickest part of the basin, and so this may wind up even being advantageous in terms of our ability to manage the part of the basin where we pump. We are looking for a recommendation on this item.
Yes. I'll move recommendation.
Second.
I have a motion, a second. Is any further discussion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Carried unanimously. Thank you. And item 6D is the Stage 3 drought update. Featuring Mr. Hagmark.
Chair Keller, Commissioners, Joshua Hagmark, Water Resources Manager, here for another Stage 3 drought update. A bunch of new graphics to show. We'll be going over the weather forecasts and rain totals so far, how our community is doing with conservation, our latest water supply strategy, the status of our lakes and reservoirs, capital projects, and water conservation program status update. So weather forecast continues to be optimistic going into the future. Unfortunately, NOAA wasn't, when we checked today, they didn't have their updated forecasts, but they continue to, despite January being somewhat dismal, and they're still believing that the rains are coming in February and March. Gibraltar, sadly enough, sits at 56% of normal rainfall. The big storm that we had, big 2-day event in early part of January, unfortunately did not pay off in the backcountry as much as it did on the coast. Kind of unusual. Usually we get twice the rainfall back there or more, and it just didn't bear fruit this time around. We have some information on how the rest of the state is doing, and this plays into our strategy for getting water for next year. As we've talked about before, we do have sufficient supplies to get us through 2016. We're already planning ahead for 2017. And as it stands now, Northern California is tracking on average, which is I guess, hopeful. How's that?
Joshua, that's a little hard to read. So if you could help us
very
with that graph.
Yes. Absolutely.
Thank you.
So what we have on this graphic here, and I apologize for the size, this right here, the blue shaded area, this defines what an average rainfall looks like. This is a compilation of, I believe, 5 or 6 weather stations up in Northern California that they use to kind of make this graphic, showing kind of where we were last year with that dismal rainfall last year, but then also showing some of the peak rainfall we've had, 82, 83, and 97, 98. Right now, we are tracking nicely with an average year in Northern California, despite what, there's been a lot of media coverage of the rainfall, but really it's average, which is after so many years of drought, it's just a vast improvement, right? So we continue to watch this, but what's hopeful about what's going on in Northern California is our ability to purchase water should we need to do that to make ends meet for next year, which we're going to need to start discussing here shortly. Hopefully the spigot doesn't turn off for Northern California and, end the year short, but that's where Northern California is. Central California, same graphic. In here, they're actually right now tracking slightly above average rainfall in Central California. Been pretty interesting. Fresno and Stockton, they're quite a ways above normal rainfall. But unfortunately, there's no big significant reservoirs there, so it's just basically feeding the rivers, which is also a good thing to start flushing some of the seawater back. General reservoir status, we're still way below average. The red lines on all these depict what we might expect that reservoir to be this time of year for on average. Still significantly below. And then this last graphic here. Oh, thought there was a snowfall. There you go. This is snow accumulation, northern, central, and southern. And right now it's tracking on average right now for snowfall. And this is, as we've talked about before, this really the state's largest reservoir is snowfall. And so this is what will ultimately feed those reservoirs come spring and summer. Community conservation continues to exceed our target, which is fantastic. As we've talked about in the past, December, January, February, March, those are difficult times to hit the conservation target because there is less outdoor discretionary water usage. But the community was able to hit 28% for December. We're now at 34% cumulative conservation since declaring a stage 3. Our water supply strategy, I continue to show, I got this graphic here showing our current supply strategy with a 25% conservation. What it shows is about 2,000 acre feet of shortfall in 2017. And this assumes no reservoir inflows and no additional state water purchases. So we've been focused on how to address that. And the graphic we have next is what if we move to, in May, a 35% conservation. So if things can stay dry, I believe this would be where we'd be recommending to the Water Commission, to council, we would go. And in that case, we're looking for about 300 acre feet of water to purchase roughly for next year to make ends meet. Is there any questions or comments on this before I move on? Okay. We talk about it so often. I apologize if I skip over it and don't go into great detail. Water supply planning, tentative milestones. Just want to keep putting this out there. This is what we're currently planning for. So on the demand management side, as I said, we're looking ahead. March, we're going to kick up the discussion, depending on what rainfall looks like, whether we need to move to that 35% target and whether we need any additional regulations to get there. On the supply management side, and we'll be talking about water purchases here shortly. We actually will start looking for water in February. That's going to be an active discussion, and we'll start getting agreements lined up and wait as long as we can to execute, which is typically in the April timeframe. And then we are moving forward with at least the general planning for a desal expansion. The current timing for the expansion right now is where it would actually play a role in our water supply should we decide to move forward. Is it would not really impact us until 2018. So expansion of this facility does not do anything for us in water year 2017. Again, this is, I don't think it's where the Water Commission is nor where staff's at, but I think to be prudent, we're doing the planning necessary for this. The one thing that we've been developing is the cost for the transmission of this water. So we have a pretty solid number from IDE for the treatment aspects of it. We are asking them right now to give us if there's any cost impacts from holding their bid until late July, because we feel like to get all the funding in place, it would probably be late July. But we have been working on the distribution improvements, because putting that much water basically into the bottom of the system creates quite a bit of problems, particularly in the winter when demands are low. And so trying to figure out how to get that water out of the low zone and up into the upper reaches of the city. And so we've been gathering those costs, and we hope as part of the rates discussion to provide some information on that in February. I should back up really quickly and just say this. We believe if things kind of remain status quo for now, that there will not be a need to consider expansion. We feel that based on rainfall in Northern California, we should be pretty successful in purchasing water, and believe going to a 35% conservation is kind of head off the need. But in the meantime, we're still preparing this information for discussion. Water rates updates, we are in development with those, going back and forth with RefTelis, trying to incorporate. There's just so many elements to a rate model. Trying to get all that information together and present something to Water Commission in February. We may have to have a special meeting with Water Commission in early March as well. Just timing, trying to get all this together, because we do need to get notices out to the community in March of our proposed rates. And so there's so many pieces in the air. Certainly having some confidence about what the rainfall is going to be and what kind of supplies we have locally will be really important to that discussion. What we're really focusing on for FY17, because we do have the costs in there for reactivating the desal plant and for operating it, but it's our status of our reserves. Our reserves are in pretty dismal shape, and again, the reserves have been set aside for just such an emergency. So I think that's appropriate that they're so challenged. But it's trying to figure out then what is going to be our recovery plan. How long are we going to take to recover those? And so that's going to be part of our rates discussion, and I think some of the policy input we're going to be looking for. And then, of course, the other one we've been talking about, when you have conservation exceeding your target, that kind of revenue loss is a challenge as well. We're speculating that we'll end the year, just based on where we are now, we're speculating we'll end the year about $2 million below what we had anticipated for revenues, just based on what we've seen for the first 6 months, which isn't too bad. I was anticipating it could be much worse when we saw the difference in August and September, when the conservation was a lot higher. So supplemental water purchases, we are looking at kind of mimicking what we've done in the past, which is working through CCWA, our state water contractor. They will be lining up various options for us to consider. They did ask what we're looking for. We said we were looking for 1,500 acre feet for 2017, and so again, that can be reduced down and it can go up, but they were looking for a general target of how much water to be looking for. One of the challenges this year, though, is the city's already committed to 4,500 acre feet of water that we have to pay back. We basically lease that water. Grateful to have it, but in the spirit of diversification of these water purchases, I do have some concerns about borrowing more water in that kind of contractual arrangement. If you may recall, it does have a lot of great features with it, in the sense that it's secure water. It's not subject to carriage losses and or issues in the delta. But I think this year, given the rainfall they had up there, I think we should be looking for just an outright purchase of water where we don't have any return element with it. So February 2016, we want to initiate those discussions with potential sellers. We've reached out to their water broker that we've used in the past, and he's already got some potential sellers in Northern California. We'll probably be drafting contracts in March and holding off, I believe it's till late April before we have to actually execute those contracts. That's basically the planting season in Northern California, and so they need to know whether to plant or whether they're going to fallow the land. And then that water gets delivered July through September to the State Water Project. So Gibraltar, as of yesterday, has 518 acre-feet in it, or 10% of capacity. We are currently not taking any water from Gibraltar due to the poor water quality. Staff up there said they're prepared for El Nino should it show up. They've been up there making sure to keep the roads open. Those routinely get closed anytime we get any rain. There's just rock falls. They've got food up there, so they can be up there for several days if they get cut off. But and then they have all the log booms out and for debris. Lake Cachuma sits with 28,000, just over 28,000 acre-feet, or 14% capacity. Fish water releases continue at about 280 acre-feet a month. And the latest discussion, which we talked briefly about last month, was the evaporation. The Bureau has made a decision on how the evaporation of the lake is going to be managed, but they did agree to revisit it in the spring. The way the Bureau is going to be managing it is punishes anybody who has water in the lake come this summer, which is we tried to point out that you're setting yourselves up the way that they've structured the evaporative, who takes this evaporation. And right now, it really has incentivized anybody who has water, you better get it out of that lake before the summer, because you're going to be taking the full burden of the evaporation of the lake on whatever water you own. And in particular, the challenge is the downstream water that's held in the lake does not evaporate. The minimum pool does not evaporate, and so the only water that is eligible for evaporation is the carryover water that we've been storing in there because of conservation efforts by our communities. And so that water is going to be taxed with the entire evaporation that goes on for the whole lake is going to be put on that small body of water, which I have this little graphic here. So basically what they're going to do is that this body of water, which is dwindling quickly, is going to take the entire evaporation that is occurring on all of this water, which doesn't make sense to me. We have been pushing the Bureau to say, hey, look, this minimum pool should help make up the balance of this evaporation. And for whatever reason, they have been holding that water is sacred and shouldn't be used. And we're hoping if things get bad, they'll reverse their decision on that. And we'll be bringing the Water Commission along on this in case we need some muscle. But this is one of those frustrating ones, and hopefully we can figure this out for the next drought, because this is unfortunate.
Do we know what the anticipated evaporation is going to be? Or?
We do. We've made some estimates. The county has put together some estimates. I want to say it's somewhere in the 7,000 acre-feet of evaporation. Right now, under the equation that they have, our carryover water would take about 2,000 to 3,000 of that evaporation, and so they're looking and saying, okay, well, the other 4,000 will also come out of carryover. Well, there's only what's left in carryover. I mean, it basically erased everything in carryover.
And what proportion of that carryover is the city of Santa Barbara's?
About 3,000 acre-feet. We actually have, that was the other challenge, we actually have some of the most carryover left. Which on one hand is good, and on the other hand, you don't want to be left with the most carryover because you're going to take the most evaporative losses from it. So this is something that has our full attention, and we continue to push back on it. Hopefully we'll see some inflow this year then that evaporation will come out of any inflow that comes into the lake. Unfortunately, though, there hasn't been adequate inflow in there to make up for that evaporative losses.
And what's the unallocated water?
That is actually inflows from the Tecolote Tunnel. And right now, we're planning to use that to help offset some of the evaporative losses. So that's how we've kind of structured it with the Bureau. Well, okay, how about this water? Since it's the discussion is, since there isn't sufficient water outside of carryover anymore, there's no new water. Usually that's where a lot of the evaporation comes from, is the water in the future. That we at least agreed that water coming from the tunnel would go to help satisfy some of the evaporative losses. Unfortunately, it's not. What does it end up being? It's not sufficient to cover the full evaporative losses. Drought capital projects. The Hope Hill Rehabilitation Project is underway. For anybody who's been up on Hope, you'll see some traffic control set up there. This is a picture down in the corner. Pop off the manhole lid, and there you go. You got a well in the middle of the street. So it's kind of one of our more unique well locations. And prior to the well rehab, we were producing about 120 gallons per minute. Our consultant is hopeful that when we finish doing this rehab, we should be able to get 180 to 240 gallons per minute, almost doubling production. The work should be done in spring. It's slated to take 2 to 3 months to complete this rehab of the well and get it back online. Desal project update. We did go to council and get the $2.3 million that we needed to move forward with the cleanup under the proposed project. Again, it doesn't clean the whole site. It's just taking care of the area where we're going to be working. So far, we're able to accomplish this within the $55 million that's been allocated already. So this basically is just eating up a lot of contingency that we had built into the project. So should we come across anything unexpected, then we'll have to talk about increasing the loan amount. Schedule impacts, we did lose about 30 days of work as a result. And Ms. Szymanski is working with the contractor to try and recapture that time. And they are, at this point, I haven't seen anything formal out of it, but I do know they're working on it. So I think worst case scenario, we'd be talking about a November completion versus an October completion. Don't think it'd have a huge impact on our water supply planning at that point. On site, though, work has resumed. Mid-December, we resumed construction and all the underground utilities and footings, so that's going on currently. And to the right, this picture here is from the manufacturing. What you're seeing right there is one treatment train. It's made up of 7 components that kind of lock together. But this is being manufactured now, and we will be sending our consultant to go view it and then also go back when it goes through its testing phase, because they'll actually put water in this, operate it, and then take it apart and bring it up to Santa Barbara.
Thank you. Last month, when Ms. Szymanski was here, she mentioned doubling up some of the construction forms to speed up that cycle. Obviously, there's additional costs there, but it sounds like from what you just said, we might not be doing that. Can you just give us an update?
Commissioner Burney, yes, that's still the plan, is to basically pay, and I don't remember the cost, but it was like $40,000 or $50,000. Instead of reusing forms, they're going to create new forms for everything so that they can do one big pour rather than a whole bunch to try and accelerate the schedule. I don't know what the schedule benefits to that were, but they are still working under that. Mm-hmm. So desal project update continued. You have the feasibility study. I think the most significant is this subsurface intake study. A draft report is out and available for public comment. The meeting is next Wednesday in the City Council's chamber starting at 9:30. In summary, nothing survived that initial screening. And we are looking for any feedback on that. But based on the work plan and criteria that we came up, nothing survived that criteria. potable reuse study, that work is still in progress, and we anticipate sometime in early June having a draft report for public comment, and ultimately at the end of June having a public meeting and kind of finalizing that work. And should there be a viable option for that, then that would eventually, we'd roll into a study phase of that. And then DSAL grant funding. As you may recall, at our last meeting, I was planning to go up and meet with DWR staff to talk about the grant funding that was available particularly for DSAL projects. I did make that trip. It was a very interesting trip in the sense that they seem to be at a totally different pace than everybody else spending the dispersing the Prop 1 money. And was frustrated to hear their timing. Their timing right now is to have draft guidelines out by March, in which following their process would mean they would be awarding a project sometime in 2017. And their current eligibility guidelines state that they won't cover any costs prior to award. And so obviously we take a particular challenge to that, and we have I have already gotten a proposal from BBK to help us out with making the legal case for why these Prop 1 funds, which were set up and sold to the voters in response to this drought, and this desal project that we've reactivated has been in response to this drought, and it seems kind of ridiculous that these monies that are available shouldn't at least partially go to help us offset those costs. And so we have seen other Prop 1 money that has been tied to the governor's declaration or the actual approval of the Prop 1 by the voters as the start of eligibility date. And so we're hopeful that we can make a legal argument for why they should be considering a different eligibility window. One of the things that was kind of particularly piqued my interest when we asked, well, why has it taken so long? You know, the voters approved this in 2014, and you're not going to let the money go until 2017? That seems, we've seen other Prop 1 money being released a lot quicker. What's going on? Oh, well, we just don't have the staff. We're short on staff. And I'm like, so you're telling me because you don't have staff, my project's not going to be eligible for any grant money? And so that was kind of a frustration. And at that point I said, well, I'm more than happy to pay to have staff here to help you. And and it was a very cordial and nice conversation. They seemed supportive. They really liked our project. That was one of the things I wanted to introduce our project, and they were certainly very intrigued. They appreciated how much we have done for conservation before just moving forward with desal. They thought we were a good example of how they wish any community considering desal would approach it, which is exhausting a lot of their conservation efforts before just getting into it.
Excuse me, this was with DWR staff?
Yeah. So we, I guess where we're moving with this, moving quickly, trying to finish up this legal argument and get it to them before they issue their draft guidelines. We'd like to influence the draft guidelines before those go out. Right now, the cap is $5 million per project, and $50 million is available in the first round. We feel the $5 million cap is probably sufficient because there is going to be a lot of other projects. When you think of desal, there doesn't seem like a lot, but this includes brine facilities, inland brine facilities, and there's quite a few in California that will be going after this money. And certainly we hope the $5 million will go a long ways to help offset some of our costs.
Question. Is there anything else we can do? I'm thinking of our elected officials that could help push this decision to change the eligibility date.
Thank you, Commissioner Burney. I appreciate that. We hope to make the legal argument, and then we can take that to our local representatives, and they can utilize that from their standpoint. But yes, we're also leveraging our Cal desal. We have a membership in Cal desal and looking for them to help out as well on this effort. So I think if we can get a strong legal argument for this, which I think intuitively it makes sense. Argument makes sense. I think if we could just back it up with the legal argument, I think we can get everybody on board. So, because I get questions all the time, we did initiate discussions with Montecito. At this point, we're trying to keep them at staff level for efficiency and be able to make some progress, but so far there hasn't been any significant progress to report. I wish I could say more at this time, but we hope we'll see something from them. But we have nothing tangible to report at this point. And then I wanted to throw this in here. I'm gonna keep bringing this graphic back to you. This is our water main break history, and I do need to continue to work on LSD. There's a lot of information on this, but what I want to point out here is this is December's main breaks. We had 18 main breaks just in December alone, and
Excuse me, each blue line is a month?
is it 1 month? Yes, is 1 month. And we have been on a steady incline here with our main breaks. So far, we're not completely out of whack with historical main breaks, but I think it's illustrating we certainly have a challenge and an investment we need to make in this infrastructure. And as I think I mentioned last month, we are working on something to bring back to the Water Commission for a bigger discussion on this related to possible approaches. I think the challenge right now is in the midst of an emergency trying to figure out financially how to go about doing this. But nonetheless, I think we need to keep this discussion alive and keep talking about it. We just actually had a main break this morning on Castillo on a 12-inch main, which is fairly significant. Unfortunately, it was near a parked car, and the car fell into the sinkhole. Very unfortunate, but we'll hopefully work with that car owner and make him whole. But needless to say, our staff have been putting in tireless overtime hours trying to respond to all these, along with their ongoing regular duties. So, anyway.
Is there a seasonal signal in there?
Chair Keller, there is a seasonality to this. We certainly see fall, winter, a much more significant increase in main breaks. There's when we go down through it, and that'll be part of our presentation, we can kind of break out the seasonality aspects of this, break out what pipes are causing, the majority of these problems are from the cast iron pipes, from what age, and to kind of go through that. There's a lot to this, and I think we could be very surgical about what work we plan and move forward with. But certainly we can expect that during cooler times, especially particularly as the temperature changes. And I think I might have mentioned this before, but you got a system that's frail. It's on the end of its useful life and doesn't take much. And so when you get that temperature change of 15, 20 degrees, that water's sitting in a reservoir above ground, it cools down at night, and then it goes underground where the pipe is 60 degrees because it stays pretty stable underground. And that contraction and expansion, and you got a pipe that's just basically been doing that for almost 100 years now, and it just says, I'm done. And that's what we've been seeing from it.
I will say this is not unique to the city of Santa Barbara. It's pretty universal for a lot of water agencies in this area. So
it is true. It is, when we looked nationally, we weren't an outlier, particularly with agencies of our age. And this has been something that ASCE, American Society of Civil Engineers, has brought up as I think we get a grade of D as a nation for funding utility infrastructure improvements. So this is some place that I think, undoubtedly when the drought ends, we need to start putting our resources to and focusing on how we're going to really try and get ahead of this because it's only going to get worse. This problem isn't going to improve unless we're making some significant progress in replacing pipe. And at this time, I'll turn it over to Ms. Ward.
Chair Keller, members of the Commission, my name is Madeline Ward, and I'm the Water Conservation Coordinator, and I will share a few slides with you today. So now that we've started our rainy season, I wanted to highlight the benefits of rain gardens. Just to give you a quick comparison, a 1-inch rain event on a 1,000 square foot roof will generate 600 gallons of water. Most common residential rain barrels hold about 50 gallons. So what we really want to highlight to our residents is to make the most out of the rain to create a rain garden and store the rainwater in the soil. Rain gardens are also called sponge gardens. They can be a beautiful water-wise addition to your landscape that reduces the need for irrigation with potable water, reduces pollutants that run off into creeks and ocean, reduces garden maintenance, and also can help recharge the groundwater. So rain gardens operate on a simple principle of slow, spread, and sink. It's important to break up hard surfaces such as pathways to create a permeable surface, to create infiltration basins such as dry creek beds to distribute the water over a broad surface to slow it down and allow absorption, to redirect downspouts to enter the basin rather than run off on the hardscape, and to add mulch to retain moisture and help break up the soil to really make it a lot more spongy, and of course to plant water-wise plants. So to help our residents understand what encompasses a rain garden and to see the beauty in a rain garden, we have 3 demonstration gardens currently. The first one I would like to highlight is Spencer Adams Park at 1216 De La Vina Street. This was created in a series of hands-on workshops to upgrade it from a lawn to a native rain garden. These workshops were open to the public. We had a basics class, a sheet mulching workshop to get rid of the lawn, a planting and irrigation workshop, and a workshop for landscape professionals. The dry creek bed and the downspout were expertly installed by the city's park staff, and this whole garden was partially funded by a California Coastal Commission grant that was facilitated by the Surfrider Foundation as part of their ocean-friendly garden program. The next garden is the Santa Barbara Association of Realtors rain garden at 1415 Chapala Street. And this was created to highlight the curb appeal of sustainable landscaping. It was converted from a lawn to a rain garden that has 3 downspouts diverted into the infiltration basins. And last year, in 2015, which was an unusually hot year, they didn't need to water the garden until mid-August. So the rainwater really carried all the way through. They'll probably need to water a few months out of the year, but the prior lawn was watered 3 times a week. The most recent lawn conversion was the Santa Barbara City College Shot Center at 310 West Padre Street. This was an unused lawn area by the auditorium, and they redirected a downspout to create a native rain garden with a permeable pathway and a really nice seating area as well. To help our residents install rain gardens, the city has a partnership with the nonprofit group Sweetwater Collaborative. We sponsor hands-on rainwater and graywater workshops, as well as classes, Graywater and Rainwater 101 classes, so people can understand the basics of these systems and answer any questions before they're actually in the field digging into the ground. So this really provides practical hands-on experience for homeowners and professionals that are looking to install these.
Ms. Ward, where can people find that information when those classes happen?
That is a great question. So we have our main website is santabarbaraca.gov/water, but we have a specific page, which is santabarbaraca.gov/rainwater, and that's where they can find about upcoming classes and workshops. And we're here for any other questions.
Any other questions from the commissioners? Big infiltration galleries, such as the ones that run down along the Santa Clara River by the Water Conservation District down there, plug up fast with silt, and they require a lot of maintenance to keep the infiltration rate up. I wonder if there are these demonstration gardens or the advice we're giving has any plan for maintenance so that the infiltration rate for only the recharge to groundwater aspect doesn't disappear.
Chair Keller, that's something that we've been looking at. We have, along with Sweetwater Collaborative, they have what's called their technical advisory panels, where they meet with all the landscapers. They talk about what they're experiencing in the field, how they can improve on it. What many of these rain gardens do is they have an area for the first flush. So, the first rainstorm, there's grit from the roof, there's all kinds of things, pollutants. It's best to release that into mulch, and then the overflow could go into the dry creek bed area where it's been dug into a deeper basin, because some of those early pollutants you don't want to go forward and clog sort of the whole infiltration swale. But I think it's something that we are, as we continue to build soil and increase permeability, we have to see how long these basins last. I haven't heard anything to indicate that they clog up quickly. We have a lot of homes that have had them for about 40 years right now, and we're working with Art Ludwig. He's been taking footage of all of his, hoses from his cisterns just running into the soil, trying to see how quickly the water will infiltrate, and it's still a pretty remarkable rate. So it's something we're continuing to monitor, but we haven't seen anything to cause us alarm in terms of just a simple rain coming from the roof type of system.
Thank you. Thank you. That apparently concludes item 6D, the Stage 3 drought update. Thank you, and this is presentation, no actions required. So we'll move to item 7, Water Resources Manager's Report. Mr. Hagmark.
Chair Keller, Commissioners, just here to answer any questions related to the manager's report. We're currently continuing to track our progress for water usage from our various supplies. Commissioner Burney, that kind of summarizes how much water we have left in Conchuma, which is 2,798 acre feet as of the end of December. That was a previous question you had. Let's see. Moving on to the water demands. This was a graphic that was put together for the in response to the long-term water supply plan, which also led back to the 2020, the 20% reduction by 2020, which we should have no problems meeting. Next graphic looks at our gallons per capita per day. This is for the entire community. We have about 90 gallons per capita per day is what our average is. One of these days I'd like to add to this graphic is what our residential is. It seems to compare apples to apples, because one of the things that's kind of challenging about this, and I bring this up frequently, is Santa Barbara is a small community of 90,000, and we have nearly 5 million tourists that come visit Santa Barbara, and it certainly plays a part in our GPCD. I mean, we should be very proud of the GPCD we have, but I think one of the other metrics that we can look at is our residential water usage, and I think that also tells another story, because that's somewhere down in the high 60s. I mean, it's really low, and the state currently considers 55 gallons per capita per day basic health and safety. I did notice a typo on here. The year for the current year is inaccurate. It's 2015, 2016. And without the 4.5 inches we've gotten in January, things were pretty dismal. We were around an inch at the end of December. The next two graphics were in the presentation, just showing the 3-month outlook. Gibraltar Reservoir status, Conchuma storage. I mean, holding, if the past holds true, the rain's right around the corner here. We should we've been tracking very closely, actually, to what what occurred in the reservoir in the last drought. And hopefully we'll get that miracle month of March as well. Wastewater inflows, steady decline. Now December we just got under 6 MGD. Should keep in mind that the wastewater flows coming in the plant back in just 2011 were pretty consistent around 8 MGD. And it will be interesting to see when we get out of the drought how much this number comes back up. A lot of this is going to be permanent, fixtures internal to the house, changes behavior inside the house. And so this could be our new norm. This is a lot less flows coming into the facility. Again, as I'd mentioned before, strength of sewage. We're still removing the same dry tons. It's just coming in with a lot less water. And then our final graphic here is the number of SSO events, sanitary sewer overflow, and we have not had any for this year so far. We did in 2015 with 17 spills, which was above our goal. However, I think we're still on the right track with that, and we'll be putting together our year-end report in March to give to channel keepers. This 2016 is the last year of the consent decree. It officially ends in December 31st. And so we'll be moving forward with that. And what I am looking for budget-wise, we had budgeted roughly 980,000 had been part of the consent decree, additional funding towards our sewer main infrastructure improvements. I want to continue to see that happen without the consent decree. I want to continue to keep that same level of funding. I think it's critical, as we've gone through the system and we're TVing it. Certainly the need for improvements is there, and I certainly want to try and keep that funding source there. So we'll be talking about that next month. And then recycled production. You do see a little bit of a blended water content in there. It's because we've had to take the facility down for a few days, make some tweaks to it, and get it back online again. But for the most part, I am not planning to do any blending of our recycled water going forward. We are pushing up against the 1,500 parts per million TDS, which is in our permit. And we're reaching out to the regional board and just letting them know we plan to violate. There is no repercussions of a violation on this, but I just have no interest in putting any potable water into that system right now. And given our current situation, I don't think it's prudent. So,
what are we planning on doing with the Valverde well?
We plan to actually operate it seasonally, so we will bring it on this summer is the plan to kind of offset demands. Because one of our biggest challenges in the recycled water system is we probably could use some more storage capacity because everybody wants to use it at the same time, and that's part of the issue. We have a lot of production during the middle of the day when there's lots of wastewater flows, but at night when everybody uses it and our wastewater flows are low, that's when we're kind of challenged. And so to kind of keep us from having to invest, I hope, in a several $1 million reservoir somewhere, I'm hoping we can use the Valverde well to kind of help out with that peaking that goes on in the summer months. And then to just recap on February's agenda, it's going to be dominated by water and wastewater rate discussions. We are working feverishly to try and get something together. So it's hopefully a complete discussion, but that's what our focus is on for February.
Regarding follow-up on Commissioner Kilbourn's question about Valverde well, that may be recharged through the reach of Las Positas Creek there right below Modoc. I don't know who actually owns the bottom of the creek, if that belongs to the city or if there could be some possibility of an engineered sort of settling basins within that creek bed.
Chair Keller, we did meet with our creeks group and have been talking about there is actually quite a bit of Prop 1 money. There's $200 million out there for stormwater projects that benefit water supply. And so we've started that dialogue, but geographically, we have a very difficult basin. It's very steep. The groundwater basins are small, and just topographically, we're very steep. The storage really to take advantage of it needs to be further up in the basin, and space is just a premium. We've been trying to find spaces and ways to do that and slow it down, where when you go to Carpinteria or Goleta, just a lot different situation for slowing down water and having spreading basins and things like that in the creek. So we have been discussing it and looking for options, but we haven't seen anything that's really viable. Rocky Nook would be a great spot, but it's pretty steep. The Rocky Nook Park, it'd be hard to widen the creek there and really slow it down. Oak Park is like our last chance to really get water into the groundwater basin. After Oak Park, it's pretty much going to feed that upper zone, which we don't really pull water out of anyway. So it's difficult and complex. Certainly, if you build a community around it, and you have these big open spaces where you can slow down the creeks and particularly the storm water flows and try and settle it in. But unfortunately, that space is a premium.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That, I guess, takes care of item number 7, the Water Resources Manager's Report. Item 8 is the date of the next scheduled meeting, which would be Monday. Nope, that should not be Monday, February 18th. It should be a Thursday. And right on the top of my head, I don't have...
Date is right, but the day is wrong. So I think
okay.
Thursday
So that's
is the 18th.
Thursday the 18th? All right, we'll move forward on that assumption that the 18th is a Thursday, and that will be the date of the next meeting. Any further comments from commissioners? If not, meeting is adjourned at 9:45.
Thanks.